2 people have been pronounced dead, 19 others taken to area hospitals with gunshot wounds, among those a toddler believed to be under 3 years old. Again, at this point, we don't know exactly what led up to this altercation to break out. Police are not yet at this point commenting on a possible motive, but they are saying that there was more than one gunman or gun person at this point, especially knowing at how many people were injured, just to give you an idea of how many bullets were flying last night.
In the east end of Toronto, far from the glass towers and the polished image the city presents to the world, there is another landscape that doesn't show up in tourist photos. A place where long rows of aging apartment buildings stretch across Scarborough, and where entire generations have grown up carrying a different version of the same city. Galloway Road was never meant to become a name that people whispered about or associated with violence. It was just a place where working class families settled. Many of them immigrants chasing stability, chasing opportunity, chasing a future for their children that felt just within reach but never fully guaranteed. In those buildings, life moved fast and slow at the same time. Parents worked long hours, sometimes multiple jobs, leaving early and coming home late. While outside in the courtyards and parking lots, young boys learned how to navigate their world without much supervision. They formed friendships that felt like family, built loyalty through shared struggle, and began to understand early that respect in their environment wasn't something handed out freely. It was something you had to earn and protect. The group that would later be known as the Galloway Boys didn't begin as an organized structure. There were no meetings or official hierarchy in the beginning, just a cluster of young men growing up in the same environment, shaped by the same pressures and bound by proximity and trust. What made them different wasn't that they wanted to become part of something dangerous. It was that over time, the streets began to reward certain behaviors and punish others, and they adapted accordingly. Money was the first shift, not the slow, predictable kind that came with school or part-time jobs, but fast money, visible money, the kind that changed how people looked at you overnight. Older figures in the area already understood how to move it, how to generate it and keep it flowing, and for younger boys watching from a distance, it didn't look like crime. It looked like power, a shortcut to a life that felt otherwise out of reach. So it started small, running errands, holding items, standing watch, learning who to trust and who to avoid. Each step seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a path. And once you were on that path, stepping off it wasn't as simple as it sounded, because now you were part of something and your identity was tied to more than just yourself. As time passed, the group tightened. Loyalty became non-negotiable and the informal network began to take on structure. Roles became clearer, expectations stricter, and the name Galloway started to carry weight, not just within the neighborhood but beyond it. Other areas in Scarborough were going through the same transformation, different blocks, but the same conditions, the same lack of opportunity and pressure to find alternative ways to gain respect and income. That's where the tension began to build. It didn't start with open violence, it rarely does. It started with small conflicts, misunderstandings, pride, territory, moments that could have ended quietly but didn't, because in environments where reputation is everything, backing down can feel like losing everything. So instead of de-escalating, situations escalated. The conflict that people would later describe as the Vern versus Galloway tension grew out of those moments. It wasn't one incident, but a series of them layered over time until retaliation became expected and expectation turned into routine. What once would have shocked people began to feel like part of the landscape, something you adjusted to rather than questioned. Residents in these areas began to move differently, paying attention to who was around, avoiding certain routes, keeping their circles tight, and even if they weren't involved in anything themselves, they understood the rules because the rules were everywhere, unspoken but clearly enforced. By the late 2000s, that tension had reached a level where it could no longer stay hidden. Incidents began happening in public spaces during the day, in front of people who had nothing to do with any of it, and while official reports reports captured some of it, much of the reality lived in conversations, in community awareness, and later in online discussions where people spoke more openly about what was happening. Then came July 2012, a night that would change everything, not because it created something new, but because it exposed what had already been building beneath the surface.
Cheyenne Charles and Joshua Yasay, who attended the barbecue on Danzig Street, and Dimitri Barnaby, another Scarborough murder victim, had one thing in common. Police say they were caught in the crossfire of the Galloway Boys gang, fighting to protect their turf. And in the case of Barnaby, the victim of mistaken identity.
And really a real sense of exactly how frightening last night's scene really was. We know there were hundreds of people attending a barbecue last night when somehow an altercation broke out, gunshots were fired, and at this point police saying there was more than one shooter.
On Danzig Street, just minutes from Galloway Road, a block party brought the community together. It was summer, the atmosphere alive, music filling the air, people gathering not as rivals but as neighbors. For a few hours, the environment felt exactly how it was always meant to feel: safe, connected, normal, and then the gunfire cut through it. Chaos replaced celebration in seconds as people ran, some fell, others froze, the sound of shots echoing through the night, and by the time it stopped, the damage had already been done. The event would become known as the Danzig Street shooting, one of the most devastating moments in the city's recent history. Cheyenne Charles and Joshua Yasay lost their lives, and many others were injured in a scene that left an entire country in shock. Emergency responders flooded the area, police secured the scene, and within hours, the story spread far beyond Scarborough. Media outlets across Canada and internationally began reporting on what had happened, trying to make sense of the violence and explain how something like this could occur in a city known for its safety. Investigations followed, arrests were made, and over time, the case moved through the courts. One of the individuals convicted in connection to the shooting was Fabian Tomlinson, and as details emerged, it became clear that the violence was not random but tied to ongoing tensions, to disputes that had been building long before that night. For people outside the community, the shooting was a shocking anomaly that didn't fit their image of Toronto, but for those living in Scarborough, it was something else entirely, an escalation of a reality they had already been navigating, a moment where everything that had been contained within certain boundaries suddenly spilled out into the open. In the aftermath, the response was immediate and intense: increased police presence, public statements from officials, community meetings, and media analysis, but none of those responses could undo what had already been set in motion over years, because the issue wasn't just the individuals involved, it was the environment that shaped them. Back on Galloway Road, life continued, not because everything was fine, but because it had to. The same building stood, the same routines resumed, but the weight of what had happened lingered, not just in memory, but in behavior, in the way people moved, thought about safety, and understood their own community. The identity tied to Galloway didn't disappear, it evolved. As older figures were removed through arrests or stepped away, younger ones filled the space, bringing their own interpretations and approaches while operating within the same framework that had already been established. Alliances shifted over time, tensions rose and fell, but the underlying structure remained intact. Because once something like that is built, it doesn't simply vanish, it adapts, reshapes itself around new circumstances, new people, and new pressures. And through it all, the narrative continued to grow, not just through official records, but through conversations, shared experiences, and the kind of knowledge that doesn't always make it into reports, but is understood by those who live closest to it. Because when you step back and look at the full picture, when you connect Galloway to Danzig, to other neighborhoods, and to other conflicts quietly unfolding across the city, a different image of Toronto starts to emerge. One that doesn't match the brochures or skyline shots, one that lives beneath the surface, a city divided into invisible territories stories where reputations travel faster than people, alliances shift in silence, and entire blocks carry histories that outsiders will never fully understand. And the truth is, this isn't just one story, it's a pattern, a network, a system, a shadow world running parallel to everything the city claims to be. So when people say Toronto is safe, they're only seeing one side of it, because on the other side, in the towers, in the streets, in the places where names like Galloway still echo, there's a different reality unfolding, one that rarely makes headlines until it's too late, one that keeps evolving, adapting, and surviving. And if you really start paying attention, if you follow the stories, the cases, and the connections, you begin to realize something much bigger. Toronto isn't just a city with gang problems. It's a city with a hidden underworld, a city where entire histories of conflict exist beneath the surface, a city where the streets have their own rules, their own power structures, and their own legacy, a city that, depending on where you stand, can feel less like a safe metropolis and more like a map of territories, a city that, for those who know, has been telling the same story for years. And this channel is where those stories get told, unfiltered, detailed, and deeper than anywhere else, because this is just the beginning of what's really going on inside Toronto's underworld.